Welcome back to the deep dive. So if you felt like the world's news feed has just been, well, completely on overdrive lately, you're definitely not alone.
Oh, absolutely.
One minute you're tracking these unexpected political victories, maybe somewhere like Chile, then suddenly you're hit with this silent, almost invisible spread of microplastics, just everywhere.
Yeah, in our food, even.
Exactly. And then, blink and NASA's launching missions millions of miles away, trying to figure out cosmic mysteries. It's a lot. A truly overwhelming amount of information coming at us from all directions.
It really is. The sheer volume, the variety.
Yeah.
It can feel like trying to drink from a fire hose.
Yeah.
Right? You want to stay informed. You want to understand the what and the why behind it all.
Mm-hmm.
But honestly, who has the time to sift through every single article, every research paper, every policy note? It's impossible. The challenge isn't just finding information anymore, is figuring out what actually matters.
Exactly. And that is precisely where we come in here on the Deep Dive. Our whole mission is to cut through that noise for you.
Yeah.
We take, a stack of sources, articles, research, our own notes, and we pull out the most important bits, those nuggets of knowledge and insight.
The key takeaways.
Think of us as your shortcut to being genuinely well-informed. We try to find those surprising facts, maybe add just enough personality to keep things interesting.
And today, our journey is going to be, incredibly broad. We're definitely not just scratching the surface. We'll be traversing a whole range of categories.
Covering a lot of ground.
Yeah, complex geopolitics,
Yeah.
shifting economic tides, then jumping over to cutting-edge science, and some really vital societal issues, too. Our goal, as always, is to look for those surprising little facts, those underlying connections, the things that help make the world a little clearer, help you connect the dots between things that might seem totally unrelated at first glance.
Our approach, as you know, is always to try and present different perspectives. Because let's face it, the truth is rarely simple or just one-sided.
Never is.
We want to allow for reasonable disagreement, definitely, but do it all with, clarity, context, and hopefully enough personality that it feels like you're just listening in on a fascinating conversation.
Like chatting with knowledgeable friends, hopefully.
Exactly. So settle in, get comfortable, because we are about to take a very, very deep dive into some of the most important global developments happening right now. Okay, let's maybe kick things off by unpacking some pretty significant geopolitical shifts and global governance issues. We're going to dig into some power dynamics, some policy debates that are really reshaping things.
That's good.
And we're heading south first, down to Chile, where we're seeing, a really remarkable political turning point.
Indeed. We're definitely observing Chile's unexpected leftward shift. And this is really exemplified by the significant victory of Jeanette Jara in the recent left-wing presidential primary.
Jeanette Jara, okay, so for anyone not familiar, she's a prominent member of the Communist Party of Chile, actually served as Minister of Labor and Social Security under the current president, Gabriel Boric.
That's right.
And on June 29th, just recently, she secured this really decisive win in the primary. We're talking 60% of the vote. That's huge.
A commanding lead.
Especially when her rivals were from, established parties like the Democratic Socialist Party, the Broad Front, even the FRVS, that's the Regionalist Green Social Federation. It's quite the journey, isn't it, from student activist to potentially the first communist president in Chile's history.
It is. And what's particularly insightful here, I think, is how this victory positions her. She'll now lead the Unidad para Chile coalition into the November presidential election.
Right.
And our sources are really highlighting this historic chance of becoming Chile's first communist president. Especially, and this is key, if the right-wing candidates, Evelyn Manon and Jose Antonio Cast, stay divided.
The split on the right.
Exactly. And the historical context here is just crucial. Both Masai and Cast have direct family ties back to the Pinochet dictatorship. So Jara's rise really illustrates Chile's ongoing challenge, doesn't it? Reconciling its deeply divided past that remains absolutely central to its political evolution. It's constantly shaping today's power dynamics, even the national identity itself.
And it's not just about her party label, is it? Her political background, it runs deep. Started as a student leader, and she had this significant, though sometimes contested, time under President Boric. Sources point to her pension reforms as a key example. They were described as, moderate due to structural constraints in the system.
Right, she couldn't overhaul everything.
But still, these reforms apparently improved employer contributions and, importantly, strengthened gender equity in the pension system. That shows a really fascinating blend, doesn't it? Kind of radical ideals meeting pragmatic policy. Suggests she's maybe more than just an ideologue.
That blend of pragmatism and progressive ideals is absolutely crucial. It's both her appeal and her biggest challenge, arguably. Her victory definitely symbolizes a resurgence of leftist politics in a country still grappling, really grappling, with its legacy of dictatorship and decades of neoliberal reforms.
Yeah.
But she faces staunch opposition, no question. And it's almost certain that media narratives are going to heavily shape public perception, especially given those residual anti-communist sentiments that, still linger in Chile after such a complex political history.
Right, those run deep.
Her success is really going to hinge on her ability to unite these diverse factions and navigate these really entrenched societal divisions. It's a tall order.
Okay, moving from that evolving landscape in South America, let's shift to domestic policy here in the U.S. We're navigating some pretty intense ideological divides right now.
That's putting it mildly.
Let's start with fiscal policy, wealth distribution, and what was famously dubbed the Big Beautiful Bill.
Yes. The Senate recently passed this bill, which was referred to quite often as One Big Beautiful Bill.
Well,
It's essentially former President Trump's sweeping tax legislation.
right.
It's now headed over to the House for what looks like final passage, and apparently there's a July 4th deadline that was set by the former president himself.
So the Big Beautiful Bill sounds grand, as you say, but it makes you ask, right? Beautiful for whom? Everyone, or just folks on the top shelf?
Exactly.
Proponents argued, the usual line with big tax cuts, that it would spur investment and economic growth. Classic argument. However, independent analysis seems to indicate it significantly benefited the wealthiest Americans. We're talking households in the top 1% projected to get an average tax cut over $60,000.
$60,000.
While lower-income households, they see comparatively minimal benefits, very small change, relatively speaking.
And if we place this in the broader context, look at the bigger picture of economic trends. This whole debate isn't just about tax figures on a spreadsheet.
No.
It's really about fundamental ideas of wealth distribution, who actually benefits from economic growth. And it directly fuels those criticisms about exacerbating income inequality.
Yeah, you hear that a lot.
It's also worth noting, I think, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell's comments. He stated that Trump's tariffs prevented the Fed from reducing rates.
Oh, interesting.
Which implies, a direct political influence on what might otherwise be seen as purely economic decisions by the central bank. It really shows how deeply intertwined economic policy is with these broader political agendas and, frankly, ideological priorities.
Okay, so from taxes, let's pivot to another really significant domestic policy shift, foreign aid reassessment. Specifically, the rather dramatic U.S. aid shutdown.
Yes, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio formally announced the complete shutdown of the United States Agency for International Development, USAID.
Just gone.
Well, its responsibilities, which are wide-ranging, are now being absorbed directly into the State Department.
Wow. Talk about a policy pivot. Rubio's reasoning was pretty direct. He cited inefficiency and failure to serve American interests. He criticized USAID for promoting what he called anti-American ideals, things like diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. He also mentioned engaging in censorship and even regime change operations.
Strong words.
Yeah. And he took aim at what he termed the NGO industrial complex. This whole move is very clearly framed as part of former President Trump's broader Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, they're calling it, initiative.
Right.
It represents this really dramatic shift, doesn't it? From what was seen, at least by many, as a global force for good or perceived good, to a much narrower focus on what some view as purely domestic priorities.
It is a dramatic shift. However, it is absolutely crucial here to present the profound counterarguments and the potential consequences of this decision.
Okay.
Critics, and this includes many healthcare and development experts worldwide, have warned that this closure could significantly undermine global development and public health.
Across the board. Yeah, you can imagine.
Our sources cite a specific study, published in The Lancet no less, that projects, get this, over 14 million preventable deaths by 2030.
14 million.
Preventable deaths from illnesses like HIV/AIDS, malaria, directly attributing these potential losses to the closure of USAID and its programs.
Oh.
And the same study credits USAID with saving more than 91 million lives just between 2001 and 2021.
91 million lives.
So the implications, the potential fallout for future U.S.-led global health initiatives, for foreign aid priorities, They are stark and undeniably severe. It signals a major reevaluation of America's role in global humanitarian efforts.
Okay, moving on to immigration policy and controversial rhetoric. We've got a rather, well, vivid and concerning image coming out of Florida, the site nicknamed Alligator Alcatraz.
Yes, this refers to a migrant detention site down in the Florida Everglades. Former President Trump visited it recently with Governor DeSantis.
Right.
And during that visit, he made some highly controversial remarks. He publicly applauded using alligators as part of immigration enforcement.
Using alligators.
Yeah, he equated their presence to having cops in the form of alligators.
Yeah.
And expressed a desire to replicate similar facilities elsewhere.
So a new kind of attraction down in Florida, maybe.
Yeah.
But definitely not one for the tourist brochures. I mean, the imagery alone is quite something.
It's jarring. And it immediately drew strong condemnation. House Homeland Security Democrats explicitly drew parallels to internment camps in Nazi Germany when they were slamming the facility.
That's a powerful comparison.
Very powerful. And just to amplify the already heated rhetoric, Trump also reportedly used some highly inflammatory, derogatory language when referring to Joe Biden during this same visit.
Right.
You know, when political rhetoric gets that charged and facilities start evoking these kinds of profound, disturbing historical parallels, it really raises critical questions about the moral, the social fabric of a society.
Absolutely.
And beyond just the rhetoric, there's also the public response and ongoing legal challenges to consider. We've seen the virality of IceBlock, for example. That's an app for anonymously reporting ICE sightings.
Oh, yeah, I heard about that.
It indicates a pretty significant segment of public resistance to these policies. And furthermore, a coalition of 20 states has actually filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration.
Or what?
For disclosing private Medicaid data to deportation officials, which raises huge concerns about privacy, about civil liberties for immigrants, and the potential chilling effect, right, on people seeking essential services if they fear their data isn't safe.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, now for something a little different perhaps, but still very much about these shifting political identities and influence, the discussions around Musk, RFK Jr., and the future of parties.
Yeah, this section is interesting because it reveals how some really prominent figures are actively challenging traditional political structures in the U.S.
Yeah.
Elon Musk, for example, he's been openly flirting with the idea of a new party.
A third party.
Yeah, in the U.S.
Yeah.
His stated motivation seems to stem from his criticisms of the traditional two-party system. He's calling for a more innovative and forward-thinking approach to governance, whatever that might mean in practice.
From building rockets and cars to maybe building political parties, Musk certainly thinks big, doesn't he?
He does.
And it's not without its own drama. Sources highlight this rekindled feud between Trump and Musk. Trump publicly stated he'd have to take a look at potentially deporting Musk.
Deporting Elon Musk.
Yeah, which immediately led to all this speculation about Musk's citizenship status. I mean, that's a pretty bold, frankly unprecedented statement from a former president. It raises questions about political influence, how influential non-citizens might be treated.
Definitely raises eyebrows.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we saw U.S. Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s recent interview with Tucker Carlson.
Yeah.
He leveled this really striking criticism against the Democratic Party, claimed it has become the war party.
The war party.
That was his term.
Yeah.
He argues they've abandoned traditional principles, basically in blind opposition to Trump. He cited shifts on things like military involvement, support for censorship, the role of the CIA, even trade deals like NAFTA, which he says Democrats once opposed, but now embrace, simply because Trump voiced criticism against them. It's a provocative claim.
And RFK Jr. going from this longtime patient advocate to, well, this is quite a turn, isn't it? Few saw this coming.
It is a turn.
Sources specifically mention his past advocacy for patient rights, but then contrast it starkly with his current proposal advocating for wide-scale health surveillance through technologically invasive means.
Health surveillance? How?
Well, the vision suggests monitoring virtually every American using an unspecified tech device. The details are notably unclear, which just amplifies the concern, right? It raises profound questions about the mechanics, but more critically, the impact this could have on privacy and personal freedoms.
Yeah, unspecified tech device monitoring everyone. That sounds concerning.
Definitely raises flags.
And placing all this in the broader context, these aren't just isolated statements from a couple of high-profile figures. They arguably reflect a deeper realignment happening, a shift in political identities, a fundamental questioning of traditional party structures. people seem to be actively seeking new ways to express their political beliefs.
Mhm.
And these figures are certainly pushing the boundaries of what that might look like, challenging norms, maybe even forging new political pathways.
Okay, sticking with domestic policy, but let's shift down to the state level now.
Yep.
California's state-level environmental reform with its new housing bill.
Yes, Governor Newsom recently signed a pretty significant housing bill. It effectively overhauls California's landmark environmental law, which is the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, as it's commonly known.
CEQA, right. A big deal in California. And the intent here seems crystal clear, doesn't it? The bill aims to streamline the process for approving housing projects by easing environmental regulations. The main goal is obviously trying to address California's severe housing shortages and promote more affordable housing in the state, which, let's be honest, has been a huge, often crippling issue for residents for years.
Decades, even. And this legislation really spotlights that inherent, often very contentious trade-off. You're balancing immediate societal needs, like building houses people can afford, with these long-term ecological considerations.
Yeah, the classic environment versus development tension.
Exactly. It's really a microcosm of a global challenge that so many regions face. How do you grow? How do you develop sustainably when you have these pressing social issues demanding rapid solutions? And environmental protections, fairly or unfairly, often slow that process down.
Right.
So this bill is trying to find a new equilibrium, a different balance. But its long-term effects, both on housing availability and on environmental quality.
Right.
Well, those will be very closely watched, I imagine.
Okay, let's shift our gaze globally once more.
Right?
Let's look at international political stability and conflict zones. It really feels like a patchwork of tensions out there right now, complex dynamics unfolding all over.
It really does.
Starting maybe in the UK, some internal political turmoil surrounding Prime Minister Keir Starmer, challenges with his welfare reform plans.
Indeed. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, he managed to pass a watered-down welfare bill not long ago. But, and this is the key part, only amid a labor uprising.
An uprising within his own party.
Yes, it required huge last-minute concessions to labor rebels just to get across the line.
Wow. Looks like even in these, established democracies, leadership can be a real tightrope walk, especially when your own party decides to do the tightrope act without a net.
Chuckles. That's one way to put it. And this really marks a troubled first year in office for Starmer.
Yeah.
It exposes these deep internal conflicts and rebellion within labor, raising pretty significant questions about his leadership strength, his control over the party.
Yeah.
The event was even described by some analysts as a slow-motion humiliation because he effectively lost control of the Commons during the process.
Yeah.
It suggests a potentially rocky start to his premiership and maybe challenges ahead for his broader agenda.
Okay, moving over to Africa now. We see the tragic reality of African protests and human rights, specifically looking at Togo's unrest. Rights groups there are reporting several individuals killed during recent demonstrations.
Which highlights a very concerning trend of violent suppression.
And these protests, what sparked them, sources say clear dissatisfaction with the government and calls for political reform in this small West African nation. The demands seem to range from, electoral reform to just greater democratic freedoms.
And predictably, the use of force to suppress these demonstrations, which resulted in casualties, has raised serious concerns about human rights violations. Togo, unfortunately, has a documented history of political unrest and contested elections.
Right, it's not entirely new there.
No. So these recent events, while tragic, are sadly part of a recurring pattern. A struggle for democracy and rights in the nation. It really underscores the fragility of political stability in certain regions and the ongoing challenges citizens face when they advocate for change against entrenched power.
From West Africa, let's jump up to Northern Europe. Denmark is making a pretty significant move in European security and conscription with its new gender-neutral draft.
Yes, this is quite interesting. Effective July 1st, 2025, Denmark is implementing a new law. It mandates military conscription for 18-year-old women, so establishing gender-neutral conscription laws.
For everyone.
For everyone at 18. And this legislation also extends the mandatory service period from 4 months up to 11 months for all conscripts, men and women.
Wow. That's a pretty bold step, certainly in terms of equality, but it sounds like it's a direct response to the current geopolitical climate, right?
Absolutely. It's framed as a direct response to NATO's increased defense readiness, especially amid these rising geopolitical tensions involving Russia.
Right, makes sense.
And it aligns Denmark with its Nordic neighbors, Norway and Sweden, who already have similar gender-neutral conscription policies. It feels like part of a broader trend across the continent.
Yeah, it does seem that way.
It absolutely is. Other NATO members, Latvia and Germany included, are also actively reevaluating their own conscription policies. They recognize this need to bolster defense capabilities. And this is all connected, of course, to the EU's recently approved $150 billion defense funding plan.
Ah, okay.
It signals this collective European effort to enhance security. This Danish policy shift really underscores a critical insight: how these geopolitical realities are fundamentally reshaping national policies, and simultaneously how the concept of gender equality itself is evolving and being integrated right into the framework of national defense. It reflects a very real, pragmatic assessment of the current security environment.
Okay, next up, let's look at some diplomatic strain between Russia and Azerbaijan. This sounds like a bit of a high-stakes game of diplomatic chess, maybe, but with very real pieces on the board.
That's a good way to put it. Tensions have really sharply escalated following a Russian police raid in Yekaterinburg. It targeted an Azerbaijani organized crime group, and this operation resulted in 2 disputed deaths. Russian authorities claimed 1 person died of heart failure, but Azerbaijani officials are alleging blunt force trauma from the police actions. This discrepancy immediately ignited diplomatic outrage.
And that sparked a huge diplomatic backlash, didn't it? Azerbaijan responded pretty strongly, canceling cultural events with Russian performers, scrapping official meetings with Moscow, and even destroying imported Russian goods, apparently citing vague contamination concerns. The accusations flying back and forth certainly don't help stabilize things, do they?
They actually don't. And Russia retaliated. They summoned the Azerbaijani ambassador to protest what Russia called media arrests and alleged mistreatment of Russian journalists in Azerbaijan.
Tit for tat.
Exactly. And Azerbaijan countered swiftly by arresting 8 Russian citizens, accused them of cybercrime and drug trafficking, allegedly linked to Iran.
Oh, okay.
The sources we have highlight that these tit-for-tat actions have significantly worsened bilateral relations. There are underlying ethnic tensions and allegations of politically motivated actions, really putting a major strain on diplomatic ties. This conflict reveals a concerning trend, I think, where these localized incidents can quickly escalate into broader diplomatic crises, often fueled by historical grievances and current geopolitical maneuvering.
And finally, in this geopolitical section, let's briefly touch on political instability in Southeast Asia, specifically Thailand's prime minister crisis.
Yes. Thailand's prime minister was recently suspended from office amidst a dispute with neighboring Cambodia.
Suspended.
Yes, suspended. And this immediate action sparked considerable concern about his political future, naturally, but also raised broader questions about the stability of the ruling administration itself.
This kind of incident really highlights the complexities of Thai politics, doesn't it? And those deep-rooted divisions within the nation.
It does.
It's a region that often experiences these shifts and challenges to its political leadership. There's often this delicate balance of power between different factions, the monarchy, the military, civilian governments. This suspension just signals another period of potential uncertainty for the country's governance. Okay, let's move into our next major theme: global conflicts, resource control, and economic currents. These areas feel increasingly intertwined, don't they?
Absolutely. They feed into each other constantly.
And nowhere is that more evident, perhaps, than in the Middle East, with its seemingly unending conflicts and constantly shifting alliances.
We have to begin with the Gaza conflict, which unfortunately continues to see intense escalation alongside these fleeting, often quickly dashed hopes for a ceasefire. Our sources, including Al Jazeera, report that Israeli forces have killed at least 102 Palestinians in Gaza, including children recently. With intensifying airstrikes, home demolitions, fears of a ground incursion are rising again.
Okay, and it's really crucial we pause here, I think, because in conflicts like this, information itself becomes a weapon, a battlefield, and casualty figures can be incredibly contentious, highly disputed.
Vitally important point.
We've seen other reports citing extremely high but importantly uncorroborated figures, something like at least 56,500 Palestinians killed and 133,419 wounded, with 11,000 missing.
Huge numbers.
Massive numbers. But our sources explicitly note, upon searching for corroborating information, there are no current events or reliable sources confirming these specific numbers.
Right.
This just underscores how vitally important it is to seek multiple verified sources in conflict zones, especially where information can be weaponized, used for propaganda. It makes discerning the true human cost incredibly difficult.
It's a critical point to keep reiterating. In conflicts where information is weaponized,
Yeah.
the ability to critically assess sources, to understand the nuanced, often tragic human cost,
Yeah.
that becomes absolutely paramount.
Yeah.
And adding to the complexity here are the conflicting stances within the Israeli government itself.
No, so
Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich has firmly rejected any ceasefire. He's insisting on a decisive victory for Israel. This really highlights these deepening divisions within the government about the war's ultimate direction, its strategy. It reveals an internal struggle that significantly impacts the entire regional dynamic.
So even as some are calling for decisive victory, this idea of a ceasefire keeps resurfacing. It's this constant push and pull, isn't it? Like trying to hold water in a sieve, maybe?
That's a good analogy.
And on the U.S. diplomatic front, we've seen former President Trump pledging unwavering support for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Classic Trump stance. But then, somewhat surprisingly, he later announced that Israel has agreed to conditions for a 60-day Gaza ceasefire, apparently following mediation efforts by Egypt and Qatar.
A potential breakthrough.
Potentially. But this proposed ceasefire, importantly, includes a naval blockade condition, which adds another complex layer to the negotiations. And meanwhile, amidst all this back and forth, the region continues to face a dire humanitarian crisis. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is operating under immense pressure, and activists continue efforts like sailing to break the siege on Gaza, trying to deliver aid, challenge the blockades.
This internal division within the Israeli government about the conflict's outcome, coupled with all this external diplomatic pressure, it significantly impacts the whole regional dynamic. It highlights just how complex, how multi-layered these crises are. Military action, humanitarian concerns, diplomatic signaling, they're all constantly in flux. Makes any kind of resolution incredibly challenging.
Now let's broaden the lens slightly and look at the wider U.S.-Israel-Iran dynamics. This is where the lines between sort of force and diplomacy seem to constantly blur. It's hard to tell what's what sometimes.
It really is. We saw Israel launching what was described as a preemptive attack on Iran back on June 13th, caused explosions in various parts of the country.
Right.
Yet, almost immediately after that, former President Trump appeared at a NATO summit. And quite surprisingly, he positioned himself as a peacemaker, reassuring allies about Russia, trying to project stability.
It's a very complex, often contradictory approach to foreign policy, isn't it? Where these aggressive actions are almost immediately followed by diplomatic gestures. It almost feels like there's a theatrical element to it.
Like a reality show, some might say.
Yeah, blurring the lines between shows of force and diplomacy in this very public arena. And amidst all this maneuvering, the U.S. government approved a $510 million sale of bomb guidance kits to Israel.
Still sending weapons.
To replenish stockpiles after war with Iran was the justification, emphasizing these kits are critical for the IDF for carrying out precision strikes. So continued military support, even as these diplomatic overtures are being made.
And adding yet another layer of tension, and maybe signaling Israel's intelligence capabilities, Mossad revealed that they knew the secret identity of Iran's top commander, Ghouani.
Ooh, okay.
That's a move clearly designed to assert intelligence superiority, put pressure on Iran. So if we place all these events into the bigger picture, they are far from isolated incidents. So they really reflect this persistent pattern of geopolitical tension, military action, economic leverage, diplomatic signaling. They're constantly in play, constantly shaping the balance of power in this incredibly volatile region. It's a continuous high-stakes negotiation with truly global ramifications.
Okay, next, let's turn our focus to the Russia-Ukraine war and global resource security. Because it really feels like it's not just about land and borders anymore, is it? It's about what's under the land, too.
Absolutely.
The real treasure hunt, it seems, is for strategic minerals now, especially things like lithium.
That's precisely right. Recent reports have confirmed that the Russian military now fully controls Ukraine's Luhansk region, an area that was illegally annexed back in 2022.
Right.
But beyond just territorial control, a really significant development is that Russian forces have also taken control of significant lithium deposits in the neighboring Donetsk region.
So it really is a scramble for lithium. This feels like a massive development because it directly disrupts a prior minerals deal that existed between Kiev and the Trump administration. These deposits are considered essential for national security. They're a strategic commodity for modern tech, for the energy sector. And Ukraine's resources were known to be among Europe's largest.
Huge potential.
The key insight here, I think, is how this battle for territory has become irrevocably intertwined with the battle for essential natural resources. And that has profound long-term implications, right? For global supply chains, for technological advancement. It shifts geopolitical power towards whoever controls these critical materials.
Absolutely. And furthermore, we've seen a pretty notable shift in U.S. military aid to Ukraine recently. The U.S. Pentagon has halted shipments of several types of weapons.
Halted shipments? Which ones?
Things like Patriot missile interceptors, Stinger missiles, Hellfire missiles, GMLRS systems. Those are the guided multiple launch rocket systems, and also 155mm artillery shells.
That's significant hardware.
It is. This decision was attributed to dwindling reserves, following a review conducted by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. And notably, some of these weapons had apparently already been deployed in Europe, ready to go, but are now being withheld. It signals a pretty significant recalibration of U.S. military support.
And this halt seems to align pretty neatly with the Trump administration's stated America First approach, doesn't it? And its aim to reduce military spending abroad.
It does align.
Ukrainian President Zelensky, for instance, reportedly received no new commitments from Trump at a recent NATO summit. And, very interestingly, the U.S. simultaneously signed an agreement giving it priority access to Ukraine's mineral resources.
The minerals. Okay.
As a way to offset previous expenditures. It really shows how resources are becoming these direct bargaining chips in international relations. It's quite explicit.
And the international alliances surrounding this conflict are also worth noting. We saw images of North Korea's Kim Jong-un honoring soldiers killed while fighting for Russia.
Right, strengthening that link.
It highlights these growing international linkages, these support networks for the conflict. And kind of in response to this global scramble for critical minerals, the U.S., Japan, India, and Australia, the Quad countries essentially, they've jointly announced a critical minerals initiative. The stated goal is to secure a stable and diversified supply chain, reduce dependency on single sources, like potentially China or Russia, and enhance national security and economic growth for the participating nations. It demonstrates this global awareness of just how strategic these resources have become and a proactive effort to secure them amidst this escalating geopolitical competition.
Okay, shifting gears now to global economic currents. We seem to be navigating some real uncertainties, but also seeing some fascinating innovation happening alongside it. Let's look first at market movements, investor sentiment. What's the mood?
Well, it's definitely mixed signals, I'd say.
What?
The stock market, specifically the Dow, saw a rise of about 400 points recently.
Yeah.
This was partly buoyed by the Senate passing that tax bill we discussed earlier. Some investors saw that positively.
Okay, short-term boost, maybe.
Perhaps. However, there's a contrasting and maybe more concerning trend. Investors are offloading long-dated U.S. Treasury bonds and notes at the most rapid exit rate since 2020.
Wow, since 2020. Why?
It seems to reflect growing concerns about the rising national debt here in the U.S. and maybe a pervasive skepticism about the sustainability of current fiscal policies. People looking long-term are getting nervous.
And adding to that sense of uncertainty, the U.S. dollar actually fell to its lowest value in over 3 years just recently on June 26th.
Yeah, that's significant.
That has really wide-ranging implications, doesn't it? For international trade, currency markets, overall economic stability. Could make imports more expensive, affect global investment flows,
Right.
Lots of knock-on effects.
It really paints this complex economic mosaic, I think. While specific sectors might see the short-term surges, the broader indicators like the bond market and the dollar value suggest these underlying anxieties about fiscal sustainability, about global financial shifts.
Yeah.
It's a really dynamic period where optimism in certain pockets is definitely counterbalanced by significant concerns elsewhere. Makes a unified economic outlook pretty elusive right now.
Okay, how about the housing market dynamics? Are we buying? Are we selling? It sounds like the housing market can't quite make up its mind either. Sort of a tale of two segments.
Indeed, it's a very nuanced picture. U.S. home prices, they saw a slower annual increase, about 2.7% in April. Yet, they still rose 4.0% between the first and second quarters of 2024. So, still going up, but maybe slowing down a bit.
Okay. What about inventory? Are there more houses available?
That's where it gets interesting. We've seen a substantial 48.3% year-over-year increase in the number of homes actively for sale.
Wow, nearly 50% more homes for sale.
Yeah. And a 6.3% rise in the total number of unsold homes. So
Yeah.
inventory is definitely up.
Yep.
But then you look at sales. Existing home sales increased by just a modest 0.8%.
Barely moved.
Right. And new home sales actually fell sharply, hitting a 7-month low in May. So this disparity suggests there are varied influences at play across different parts of the housing market. Increased inventory might be giving buyers more options, maybe a bit more bargaining power in certain areas, but high interest rates could still be dampening enthusiasm, particularly for new constructions or first-time buyers. It's not a simple picture.
Definitely not. Okay, let's dig into economic health and consumer confidence, because here it seems like we're seeing really divergent views, almost a paradox, wouldn't you say?
It really does feel that way. The Commerce Department recently revised its data, showing the U.S. economy actually contracted by 0.5% in the first quarter of this year.
Contracts, so shrank.
Yes, a larger decline than they initially reported, and it marks the first quarterly reduction in 3 years. So that signals a significant slowdown.
Okay, that sounds pretty negative.
It does. Yet, paradoxically, consumer sentiment reports from June are almost all over the place. The University of Michigan survey showed a notable improvement, a significant 16% jump in confidence. That's the largest one-month rise in over 3 decades. Suggests people are feeling more optimistic about their personal finances.
16% jump. But wait, wasn't there another report saying the opposite?
Exactly. In stark contrast, the Conference Board's Consumer Confidence Index actually declined to 93. That makes it the second lowest confidence level since February 2021.
So people feel good about their own money, but bad about the overall economy. How does that work?
It's like people are maybe optimistic about their personal situation, perhaps easing inflation helps there, but simultaneously worried about the big picture. It might reflect this disconnect between individual experience and these broader economic anxieties. And this complexity in consumer attitudes is truly fascinating. It suggests that while easing inflationary pressures might be providing some relief, these positive feelings are maybe battling these lingering uncertainties about the job market, about global dynamics. For instance, German consumer sentiment also sags. Households there are showing less confidence in the nation's current economic conditions.
Oh, is that?
Concerns about persistent inflation, employment stability, the overall geopolitical climate. Sound familiar?
Yeah, echoes what we see here.
And this is all happening against the backdrop of what seems to be an ongoing broader economic downturn in certain key sectors. We've seen reports of over 63,000 tech industry layoffs in 2023, companies like Intel cutting hundreds of jobs more recently. That creates a real sense of caution, even if some indicators look positive.
Yeah, that tech layoff number is pretty sobering.
Okay.
Shifting slightly to business evolution and investment trends. What's new and how companies are adapting? Where's the money flowing?
Well, one major, almost hidden trend is the massive investment going into infrastructure specifically for AI. U.S. power companies are pouring around $200 billion into new power infrastructure.
$200 billion on power.
Yes, including new power plants, new transmission lines. This colossal investment is specifically to meet the escalating electricity demands driven by the rapid growth of artificial intelligence, AI data centers.
Ah, the AI data centers need a lot of juice.
A lot of juice. This signifies not just a response to current demand, but really a broader modernization effort of our entire energy grid. They're anticipating a future increasingly dominated by AI.
That's a staggering amount of money. And in the banking world, are we seeing shifts in regulation that could have big ripple effects?
Yes, the Federal Reserve's Board of Governors recently made a pretty pivotal decision. They voted 5-2 to reduce banks' cash reserve requirement.
Meaning banks hold less cash.
Essentially, yes. It allows the largest U.S. banks to hold less cash in reserve against potential bad loans. Now, the stated aim is to stimulate the economy by promoting credit flow and investment, get more money moving.
Okay.
But naturally, it also raises important considerations about the delicate balance between financial stability and economic stimulation. Critics worry it might increase systemic risk down the line.
Right, less cushion if things go wrong.
Exactly. On the investment front, though, we're still seeing robust activity in certain areas. Catalio Capital Management just closed a substantial $400 in Fund 4 to invest in innovative healthcare companies.
Healthcare's still hot.
Seems so. And Figma, the design software company, is reportedly moving closer to a blockbuster IPO that could raise $1.5 billion.
Yeah.
Potentially matching CoreWeave's record IPO from earlier this year. So strong interest still there in tech and healthcare ventures.
And sometimes business evolution means, well, A familiar brand disappearing, right? Like TSB in the UK.
Yeah, that's a big one. TSB, a really long-standing brand in the UK, might soon vanish from the high street. It's part of a potential deal with Santander, worth up to £2.9 billion, could end its 215-year presence.
Wow, 215 years. That's a significant change for UK consumers for the whole banking landscape there.
It really is. It's also interesting to note the corporate accountability issues cropping up. There's a SpaceX manager alleging harassment, retaliation, and security violations in a lawsuit filed against Elon Musk.
Against Musk himself.
Yes. And this lawsuit highlights what are described as pervasive issues within the company's work environment. It raises these broader corporate governance concerns that definitely go beyond just one individual or one company.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, finally in economics, let's look at some significant international trade disputes and realignment. These seem to be actively redrawing the global economic maps right now.
They really are. The dynamics are shifting fast.
Who knew trade talks could be so dramatic? We saw former President Donald Trump decide to just cut off all trade negotiations with Canada. Full stop.
Right, over Canada's digital services tax.
Exactly. But then Canada, in what seemed like a very swift strategic move, decided to rescind the digital services tax. Just like that, which allowed trade talks to resume.
Blinked first.
It seems so. This whole exchange really underscores the intense negotiations and strategic economic policy considerations between nations. It felt almost like a high-stakes game of chicken, didn't it? Where economic leverage is just this incredibly powerful tool.
It really is. And placing this in the broader context, these trade shifts vividly illustrate how geopolitical pressures are fundamentally reshaping global supply chains, economic alliances. Another powerful example is China's activity.
What are they doing?
China has significantly increased its imports of Russian base metals, things like aluminum, copper, nickel. In 2024, they saw almost 56% year-on-year growth in Russian aluminum imports alone.
56% growth. Wow.
Yeah, and this is seen as a direct consequence of Moscow redirecting trade toward Asia amid Western sanctions. Russia needs buyers, China needs metals. But this shift has, in turn, led to major price spikes in global metal markets for everyone else. It just demonstrates how sanctions, which are intended to isolate, can sometimes boomerang, right? And inadvertently create these new, powerful economic pathways and alliances, fundamentally reshaping global commerce in unexpected ways.
Yeah, fascinating. Okay, let's leave the world of policy and economics for a little while. Let's blast off into frontiers of discovery, science, technology, and the environment. This is where things get truly captivating, I think, pushing the boundaries of our knowledge.
Absolutely. This is always exciting stuff. First up, let's talk space exploration. We're continuing to unveil the universe, figure out our place in it. And NASA has recently launched the third season of its Universo Curioso de la NASA.
Oh, their Spanish language podcast. I love that they're doing that, reaching out globally, making science accessible.
Yeah, it's the agency's only Spanish audio program currently. And its focus is on these incredible missions, like Artemis II heading back to the moon, the profound legacy of the Hubble Space Telescope.
Can't believe how long Hubble's been up there.
I know. Also covering a future solar mission and cutting-edge dark energy research with the Roman Space Telescope. It's all aimed at inspiring a global audience. And it really connects back, doesn't it, to NASA's historical commitment to public outreach, like the old Space Mobile program from the 60s that literally brought space science to communities in vans.
Yeah, bringing the cosmos down to Earth. Love it.
And speaking of space, our Mars rovers are still incredibly busy up there, pushing the limits of Martian exploration. NASA's Curiosity rover, it successfully executed a minor repositioning maneuver. They affectionately call it a bump.
Chuckles, a Martian bump.
Yeah, and then it did a straight 20-meter drive. This really meticulous movement was all about getting into position to analyze specific Martian rock formations, targets with names like Santa Elena, Estancia Alcamari, and Tecática.
Okay.
And they were also trying to detect early morning frost, which, if found, would be a huge discovery for understanding the planet's water cycle.
A Martian bump leading to potentially groundbreaking discoveries. That's just fantastic, isn't it? And not to be outdone, the other rover, Perseverance.
Right. The Mars 2020 science team meeting recently reviewed Perseverance's progress, including some fascinating discoveries up at the Jezero crater rim, things like spherules at Witch Hazel Hill.
Spherules, little balls of rock.
Yes, small spherical rocks. They could provide really important clues about Mars's ancient geological past, how water might have shaped the landscape.
Cool.
And beyond just exploring planets, NASA missions are also critically helping us explain and predict the severity of solar storms, which is crucial for us here on Earth.
Right. This can cause real problems.
They can. For example, remember that unexpectedly intense geomagnetic storm back in April 2023? It caused stunning auroras seen as far south as Texas.
Yeah, I saw pictures. Incredible.
Scientists now understand it got so intense because it interacted with something called a coronal hole. That's a region in the sun's atmosphere where the solar wind escapes much faster, creating this high-speed stream of charged particles aimed our way.
Okay, so we understand it better now.
We do. And there are exciting advancements in predictive technology, too, including something called the GeoCME machine learning model. It could potentially provide earlier warnings, maybe up to 2.5 hours in advance, using data from spacecraft positioned closer to the sun.
More warning time would be huge.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What's truly fascinating here, I think, is how science keeps pushing the envelope, not just in pure discovery like finding spherules on Mars, but also in developing technologies that are crucial for safeguarding our infrastructure right here on Earth. Power grids, satellite communications, all vulnerable to these powerful solar events.
And sometimes space exploration even gets tangled up in politics down here, right? Congress apparently greenlit a NASA moon plan that was actually opposed by Elon Musk and the billionaire Jared Isaacman.
Oh, interesting.
And Musk had even publicly sort of thrown his hat in the ring, proposed himself as the next NASA administrator. It just goes to show, even among the stars, there's still earthly politics and these competing visions for how we should explore space. Okay, let's come back down to Earth now and dive into the AI revolution, which is, well, it's rapidly reshaping human communication, our very intelligence, in really profound ways.
It really is. And one remarkable societal shift that's happening, supported by research from the Max Planck Society, no less. People are actually beginning to mimic the language patterns and phraseology of popular generative AI chatbots, like OpenAI's ChatGPT.
We're starting to talk like the chatbots. Seriously.
Apparently so. This research clearly indicates AI's tangible influence on human communication. It's extending beyond just being a tool we use to actually shaping our linguistic habits.
So not only are we talking to AI, we're starting to talk like AI. That's definitely a development for the history books. Or maybe the therapy couch, I don't know.
Chuckles could be. And it's not just about mimicry either. It's a full-on global race for superintelligence that's underway.
Right, the race is on.
Indeed. Meta, for instance, has explicitly announced the creation of Meta Superintelligence Labs, or MSL, their stated goal, developing AI systems that exceed human intelligence, aiming for nothing less than personal superintelligence for everyone.
Personal superintelligence. Wow, that's ambitious.
Hugely ambitious. And this goal is part of this intense global competition in the AI space. We see China's DeepSeek claiming advancements over OpenAI's ChatGPT. We see former President Trump's proposed $500 billion Stargate initiative in the U.S. designed to accelerate AI development.
Stargate, okay.
Even Apple is reportedly considering using external AI models to enhance Siri capabilities, potentially leveraging models from Anthropic or OpenAI just to stay competitive in this incredibly fast-moving landscape.
Everyone's scrambling.
Everyone is scrambling. And this increasing mimicry of AI language patterns, it highlights a really profound challenge, doesn't it? As AI integrates more deeply into our communication, how do we maintain unique human distinctiveness? How do we maintain control over our evolving linguistic identity? It feels like a crucial, maybe even urgent task for society to grapple with.
Yeah, definitely food for thought. Okay, from the future of intelligence to the health of our planet right now, let's turn our attention to environmental health and some urgent planetary concerns.
And unfortunately, there's plenty to be concerned about. Europe is currently experiencing an intensifying heat wave. Spain and Portugal are breaking alarming temperature records. We saw 46 degrees Celsius, that's about 115 Fahrenheit in El Granado, Spain, 37.6 Celsius in Barcelona.
Just brutal heat.
Brutal. And scientists unequivocally attribute these extreme temperatures to human-driven climate change. They explain that global warming is significantly amplifying heat waves by doing things like trapping hotter air within atmospheric heat domes, which creates these prolonged periods of dangerous, life-threatening conditions.
And then there's the other creeping environmental issue. Microplastics. Everywhere. These minuscule particles are they're pervading various aspects of the environment, including the very food consumed by humans.
Yeah. That's disturbing.
It really is. Studies are showing this worrying trend where how we store and reuse food containers correlates with microplastics actually getting into the food products. They're found in seafood, in bottled water, even in the air we breathe now.
So we're eating and breathing plastic.
Pretty much. And while the full health implications are technically still being explored, their sheer ubiquity, the fact that we're literally consuming plastic, it definitely raises alarms about long-term human health, about ecosystem integrity.
Yeah, you'd think. And placing this in the broader context, these widespread environmental challenges, the heat, the plastics, they demand urgent collaborative action on a global scale.
Right.
And transparency in data is absolutely paramount for effective global responses.
Right.
Which brings us to a critical concern that's emerged recently. While tracking sea ice serves as an early warning system for global heating, providing vital data, the U.S. decision to potentially halt data sharing on this critical metric, well, that will make it harder for scientists globally to monitor and understand climate change implications.
So turning off the alarm just when we need it most.
That's one way to look at it, yeah. And this decision is particularly concerning given other localized issues popping up, like official drought conditions already being declared in northwest England and Yorkshire. It highlights the immediate diverse impacts of a changing climate happening right now.
Okay, finally in our discovery section, let's touch on public health and some crucial unresolved questions lingering out there.
Yes, specifically regarding COVID-19. The World Health Organization, the WHO, has officially announced inconclusive results from its prolonged investigation into the origins of the SARS-CoV-2 virus.
Still inconclusive, after all this time.
Still inconclusive. They attribute this inability to draw clear conclusions to crucial information that remained unprovided by countries, particularly citing China, which significantly hampered their efforts to trace the virus's origins definitively.
So still a mystery, basically, and a politically sensitive one?
Extremely complex and politically sensitive, yes. And understanding the origin is genuinely key to preventing future pandemics. We need to know how these things start. The continued lack of definitive answers really highlights these ongoing challenges in global health cooperation and the inherent difficulty in getting full transparency when major geopolitical interests are involved. The scientific community keeps pushing for clear data, but it remains elusive.
Okay, let's wrap up our deep dive today by turning our attention now to societal issues, justice, and cultural preservation, looking at sort of the human fabric of our world.
Sounds good. Starting with justice and accountability, we have a truly disturbing case of political violence coming out of Colombia, an attempted assassination.
Attempted assassination, who?
There's a nationwide manhunt underway for a man named Elder Jose Arteaga Hernandez, known by his alias El Costeño. He's suspected of orchestrating the attempted assassination of Senator and presidential hopeful Miguel Uribe Turbay in Bogota.
Wow. Was he hurt?
Uri was reportedly shot 3 times, including twice in the head, but survived.
Incredible. And this suspect, El Costeño, who is he?
He's described as a hairdresser turned alleged gang leader.
A hairdresser orchestrating a political hit? That sounds absolutely wild, like something out of a crime thriller, but terrifyingly real.
It does. Investigations suggest it was a premeditated, politically motivated contract killing. The gang was allegedly paid cop $700 million, which is about $175,000 US dollars.
Okay.
And Arteaga, El Costeño, is seen as this crucial link to uncovering the intellectual author behind the whole plot. What's more, there's even speculation circulating, though importantly, no direct link has been confirmed around President Gustavo Petro's potential indirect influence on the incident, which just underscores the deep, volatile political tensions simmering in Colombia right now.
Yeah, that's incredibly tense.
This incident really highlights the volatile dynamics of political life in regions susceptible to this kind of violence, where criminal elements can unfortunately be leveraged for political ends. And speaking of international plots, Germany recently foiled an Iranian plot.
Another one?
Yes. A Danish citizen was arrested in Germany on suspicion of spying for Iran, allegedly providing information about Iranian opposition groups operating in Europe.
Okay, espionage.
And in a related, and maybe even more crucial development, Germany also uncovered and foiled an Iranian plot to attack Jews within Germany. This underscores the ongoing tensions and threats facing Jewish communities and the complex web of international espionage and counterterrorism efforts constantly at play beneath the surface.
Right, a constant vigilance needed there. Okay, next, a really important story about combating child exploitation, the Medellin case and global cooperation.
Yes, this involves a man named Stefan Andres Correa. He was sentenced to life in prison in the U.S. for serial sexual crimes against minors committed in Medellin, Colombia.
Life in prison, what did he do?
Our sources details his extensive travel, a shocking 45 times back and forth between the U.S. and Colombia in just 2 years. The evidence uncovered was horrifying. Over 100 explicit videos, communications with a known sex trafficker. And tragically, more than 50 children ultimately identified him as their abuser. It paints just a grim picture of systemic exploitation.
That's just horrific. But the conviction is a success, right, for law enforcement?
It is seen as a major success for Operation Cazador, which is a joint Colombian-U.S. initiative. It really showcases successful international cooperation and demonstrates the effectiveness of using technologies and intelligence operations to track and prosecute these absolutely heinous crimes. It shows what can be achieved when international agencies truly collaborate.
Yeah, that cooperation is key.
It is vital. But this case also naturally intensifies scrutiny on the broader issue of child sex tourism in places like Medellin. And it raises a critical question. How do societies truly address the root causes of this exploitation? How do we move beyond just enforcement towards comprehensive prevention?
Right, stopping it before it happens.
Exactly. Yeah. Critics argue that current approaches often focus too heavily on law enforcement rather than addressing the systemic socioeconomic factors, things like poverty, lack of opportunity that drive exploitation in the first place, leaving children vulnerable. This also brings to mind the previously mishandled case of Timothy Allen Livingston. Remember him? An American caught abusing minors in Colombia but was released, sparking international criticism.
Right, that was an outrage.
It really underscores for consistent justice systems globally and for addressing those root causes.
Okay, shifting gears to a high-profile celebrity trial. We have the recent verdict concerning Sean Diddy Combs. What happened there?
Well, the jury in the trial of Sean Diddy Combs reached a partial verdict. They found him not guilty of sex trafficking, which was the most serious charge in that category, but convicted him on some lesser charges.
Okay, so not guilty of sex trafficking, but what about the other major charge?
Crucially, they failed to agree on the racketeering conspiracy charge. So that means continued deliberation is required for that very serious count. The jury's still out on that one, literally.
A partial verdict. It really is like a cliffhanger in a legal drama, isn't it?
It kind of is.
But obviously for Diddy, it's very real stakes, even if the sex trafficking charges specifically didn't stick. This high-profile case has garnered huge media attention, hasn't it? Highlighting the intense scrutiny public figures face in the legal system.
Absolutely. And our sources even noted his emotional 5-word message to his mom in court during the proceedings. I'll be all right. Love you. Just a poignant human moment amidst all the legal complexities.
Yeah. And just briefly, any other crime updates catching attention?
Just a couple of quick notes. A Scranton man was charged with aggravated assault of a city police officer there, highlighting, the ongoing challenges and dangers faced by law enforcement. And separately, the Michigan Attorney General is investigating a company that was promoting these twin flame romance concepts, looking into potentially deceptive practices. Raises questions about consumer protection in the sort of online relationship and self-help space.
Okay. Now for something that usually warms the heart. Cultural preservation and community resilience.
Yes, and this is a wonderful story out of Suriname. There's been a significant effort to preserve the Jewish heritage of the country through the digitization of over 600 gigabytes of historical documents.
Wow, 600 gigabytes. Where are they storing all that?
They're now safely stored in Paramaribo, the capital, which itself is a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
Fantastic. And this project, what does it cover?
It's incredible. Led by a Dutch historian, Dr. Rosa de Jong, it meticulously chronicles centuries of Jewish presence in Suriname, dating all the way back to the 1600s. It documents their unique blend of traditions, Sephardic, Ashkenazi, but also mixed with local traditions. It reflects this really rich, diverse history of migration, cultural integration over hundreds of years.
That sounds like a truly remarkable undertaking.
It really is. And the project also highlights the crucial role of community effort. Like one woman, Lily Duane, who's 78 now, she tirelessly safeguarded many of these precious documents for over 2 decades herself.
Amazing dedication.
Isn't it? This initiative, it doesn't just secure centuries of history against the threats of, climate change, physical decay. It also celebrates this cultural convergence with local indigenous and African peoples. It created this unique societal fabric in Suriname that speaks to a profound history of coexistence.
That's beautiful.
Placing this in the broader context, this project powerfully exemplifies how digital technology can play such a crucial role in conserving diverse cultural histories for future generations. ensuring these rich, nuanced narratives aren't lost, but remain accessible as testaments to human resilience, to cultural blending. It's really inspiring.
It really is. Okay, let's just briefly touch on health and safety in everyday life, because these stories are often tragic, but they serve as constant reminders of life's unpredictability and the importance of public safety.
Yes. Sadly, we saw news of a 5-year-old boy who died from an allergic reaction after collapsing at school. It just underscores the critical need for robust allergy action plans, for emergency preparedness in all our educational settings.
Absolutely vital.
And separately, a 7-year-old girl was tragically killed by a falling tree in a park, which prompts concerns about urban tree management, about safety in our public green spaces, especially maybe as climate conditions change and stress trees.
Yeah, these are just heartbreaking reminders, aren't they? That life's biggest moments, good and bad, often happen in the most unexpected places. But sometimes, amidst the tragedy, there are also these heroic acts.
Like the story of the father who, quote, heroically jumped off a Disney cruise ship to save his daughter after she fell overboard.
Wow, did they?
Yes. Thankfully, both were successfully rescued. But these incidents, from quiet schools to crowded cruise ships, they just serve as these stark reminders that vigilance and effective safety protocols are just key in our daily lives.
So true. And finally, let's take a quick look at sports and societal debates where the playing field often reflects these broader social currents happening around us.
It often does. Wimbledon gave us some upsets recently. British number 1, Jack Draper, won his opener, which was good news for the home crowd. But the American star, Coco Gauff, was actually ousted in the opening round in a shocking upset by the Ukrainian player Diana Yastremska. Gauff finished with apparently 29 unforced errors.
Ouch. 29. That's a tough day at the office.
Yeah, it's a reminder that even the very top athletes have off days, right? And the pressure of a Grand Slam tournament can just be immense.
For sure. Any other sports news?
In other team sports, England's cricket team slumped to a second T20 defeat against India, which kind of showcases India's growing dominance in that short format of the game. Real Madrid beat Juventus over at the Club World Cup. With Kylian Mbappe returning to boost their offense, highlights the high stakes, the global appeal of international club football.
Yeah.
And over in the NBA, the Milwaukee Bucks made headlines by waiving star guard Damian Lillard in order to sign center Miles Turner. A big strategic move, clearly aimed at reconfiguring their roster for another championship run.
Always maneuvering in the NBA. And finally, there was a sports story that connects directly back to those broader societal issues we talked about.
Yes, the news that trans swimmer Leah Thomas was effectively stripped of medals after a Trump administration crackdown.
Right.
This is part of a broader administration attempt to remove transgender athletes from women's sports categories.
Right.
And following this, UPenn, which is her university, agreed to restore records and standings to the female athletes who were impacted by the previous race result involving Thomas.
Okay.
This whole situation really raises that crucial question again, doesn't it? How do the rules, the politics of sports, reflect these broader societal debates? Debates about fairness, about inclusion, about what actually constitutes a level playing field? Particularly as our understanding of gender identity continues to evolve. It's just another arena where social values, scientific understanding are being actively, sometimes fiercely, contested. It sparks these really impassioned discussions about the very definition of athletic competition itself.
Wow. Okay. What an incredible breadth of information we've managed to cover today. It really is staggering when you lay it all out.
It really is.
From those shifting political landscapes in Chile and the U.S. to the intricate dance of global economies and these emerging trade wars, then jumping to the cutting edge of space exploration, AI development, all while grappling with these really pressing environmental and societal challenges. It's just a testament to the incredibly dynamic, interconnected world we live in, isn't it?
It truly highlights how seemingly disparate news items, a political shift here, a resource discovery there, a technological breakthrough somewhere else, are often deeply interconnected. They form this complex tapestry of global events that really demand our attention, our critical understanding. Each thread seems to pull on another, shaping the intricate, sometimes messy realities of our world.
And that, hopefully, is the value of this kind of in-depth exploration. We really hope this deep dive has provided you, our listener, with the context, with multiple perspectives that you need to feel truly well-informed. But, without that overwhelming feeling of information overload we started with.
Exactly. And as we've seen today, how quickly political narratives can shift, how technology just continues to redefine what's possible in our digital lives, our physical world, and how environmental changes demand our urgent attention, our proactive responses. It's clearer than ever that knowledge truly is power. Which brings us maybe to a final thought for you to ponder. In a world where information is power, how do you plan to apply the knowledge gained today? How will you use it to better navigate and perhaps even help shape the future that's unfolding around us?
Something to think about. Until next time, keep digging, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.